and ecopsychology. As you undoubtedly know, our current economic demand for continual growth is taking a high toll on both people and the planet. A few years ago, Americans, who make up only 5% of the world's population, used nearly a third of its resources and produced almost half of its hazardous waste. And this way of life is being exported across the globe. It's simply not possible for the Earth to sustain our species' current level of consumption over the long haul. Add overwork, personal stress, the erosion of family and community, skyrocketing debt, and the growing gap between rich and poor, and it's easy to understand why some people say the American dream is no bargain. But even though evidence of this appears every single day in the news, the status quo still remains largely unchallenged. Some of the cultural and psychological underpinnings of factors that induce or encourage consumption are psychological manipulation of the potential consumer to artificially manufacture desire, the unquestioned appropriation of resources, both human and more than human, in industrialized societies, and the deeper reasons we like to shop. Consumerism has many effects on us as individuals, as a culture, and as a species, and these must be faced in order to more fully understand the pressures we're facing and to identify alternative solutions. In 1999, when I first started looking into this in an academic way, I did a library search on consumer psychology. The overwhelming majority of the resources I found were, to my great surprise, and actually even greater horror, they were dealing only with manipulation. How to get more hits on your website. How to lure people into buying your product. What kind of colors sell more product? What kind of font? What kind of packaging? And classes teaching marketing techniques. This is a branch of psychology? And the articles had nothing to do with the effects of consumerism on the consciousness or the lives of the consumers. They were instead focused on selling techniques for inducing mindless consumption. In other words, how to create an insatiable lust for more and more stuff. Stuff, which, by the way, is made up of other beings' bodies, our brothers and sisters on this earth, and the earth herself, and of course the creation and transport of which are based on a form of which in a lot of cases is modern-day slavery. The entire body of knowledge known as consumer psychology deals with how to brainwash people into becoming mindless consumers, thus contributing to their own destruction. And what I found most alarming was that nowhere were the ethics of this enterprise questioned. Now, things are a bit different now. Although consumer psych methods continue apace, ecopsychologist Alan Kanner has managed to open the field's eyes some. One of your readings this week comes from his book, the first that APA ever published on the topic. When you next go into a grocery store, pay attention to its layout. Where are the colorful packages kept? Where the most expensive items are laid out? How far you have to travel, and past what glittering temptations in order to get to the simpler staple foods like greens and milk? How the pricier items are right there at eye level, and the cheaper ones are below, and so on. We could do an entire month just on techniques like this. And you've likely heard of product placement. It's a form of advertising that comes to you when you go to the movies and a character gets out a can of soup whose label is showing, or uses a razor of a certain brand. Well, a newer form is now in real time. It's entirely possible that if you go to a public spot like a bar, that random stranger who starts talking with you is actually being paid to connect in order to surreptitiously plug a product. I find this method particularly troublesome because of the systemic effect. The thought of possibly being manipulated like that, if you know about it, will make people even more wary of making connection. A major strategy, and perhaps even purpose, of the advertising industry is to turn capricious wants into perceived needs. Noam Chomsky called this the manufacture of desire. Great term, huh? The manufacture of desire. It's quite insidious, and it deserves scrutiny. One way the agencies do this is by deliberately trying to make people feel bad about themselves, so that they'll buy the preferred product in an attempt to be more sexy, young, attractive, slim, powerful, rich. Well, fill in your own personal blank here, right? In other words, to boost the spirit. But doing this is like feeding a starved dog a rubber bone. The real hunger is for feeling good about ourselves, our contributions, and our connections. How many of us do retail therapy after a bad day? We buy something to pamper ourselves, and it fills the void for a little while with its newness and arising feelings of our own worthiness. I deserve to be spoiled today. But just like with any addictive substance, the departure of its serotonin-licious short-term delights leaves us craving more. We begin to perceive a certain level of consumption as a need. And so we got caught up in the rat race of needing to work more to get more money, which leaves us feeling more empty and frightened as the debt rises. And so then we go shopping to feel better. Well, no wonder popular magazines are full of articles on how to reduce household clutter and how one can watch 2 separate TV reality shows about hoarding behavior. How can we tell the difference between wants versus needs? When my father was young, nobody in rural Idaho owned a refrigerator. A few rich people had ice boxes, which the iceman came to fill on a regular basis, but a refrigerator was an unimaginable luxury. You knew about them, my dad said, but you never gave a thought to owning one yourself. It was sort of like the crown jewels of England. I contrast his experience with my own. If I moved into an apartment that didn't have a refrigerator, I know I'd feel it to be quite substandard. Wouldn't you? And I'm a person who lived outside in a tent without electricity for 5 years. I know full well I can do without a refrigerator, and yet it's come to be an expectation that a fridge will come with any habitable house. At least in the first world countries. So how do you distinguish necessities and luxuries? Are there such things as necessary luxuries? If you imagine reducing your possessions step by step, at what point does it feel threatening? At what point do you think you'd feel deprived or even somehow degraded? These are provocative questions to consider in our own lives. On the shelves back here, I think I'll go get it. I possess a small book I want to show you because we're doing a movie. I can show it to you. Hang on. There. Okay, here it is. It's called The Colonial Tobacconist. It was printed on a hand press by a friend of mine. Can you see that? The Colonial Tobacconist. It's this big. It's an artistic rendering of a legal document. Look at that, pretty, huh? It lists all of the possessions of a tobacconist in the colonial era upon the event of his death. Ernest Kurtz. The list contains about 7 pages total. Here it is, the inventory. 7 pages total, triple spaced. It's one line each, a book 3 by 4 inches. Means what, about 45 items total. This includes all of the materials for not only the contents of his home, but his business as well. 9 tons of tobacco. 1 pair of scales and a 56 weight. 5 boxes of tobacco pipes. 1 grindstone. 59 old German books. 7 sheets, 10 towels. 1 bedstead. 2 old chairs. 4 small pewter dishes, and so on. 45 items total for everything. If you made a list of every single possession you own, and this includes things like 10 pairs of underwear and 24 paper clips, how long would your list be? It's not a bad exercise to try. My first thing would be, obviously, piles of books. When you move them, you're aware of them, right? Consumerism is woven very thickly throughout every aspect of life in the industrial growth society. But there are, however, ways out. Here's where action at the individual level, where psychology reigns, has a real impact. Strategies for addressing overconsumption on the individual level include identifying and feeding our actual, deeper desires, and moving toward a life of voluntary simplicity. If you've been to my class all along, you have had a section on bioregionalism. Please take a moment to recall this. And if you haven't, bioregionalism focuses on a mindful, intentional relationship with our place and community, whereas voluntary simplicity focuses on a mindful, intentional way of living in our everyday lives. By integrating both the inner and the outer aspects of life into an organic and purposeful whole, voluntary simplicity supports a bioregional and deeply ecological way of life. In other words, voluntary simplicity enables us to live congruently and responsibly within our bioregions as knowledgeable guardians of the place where we live. Now, it might sound really inspiring. To live this way requires a radical reorientation away from the attitudes, assumptions, habits, and expectations of the global consumer society, and toward conscious, purposeful work in our local communities. It's easier said than done, but in doing so, even the first steps, we travel the road to self-realization as we find ourselves speaking for the larger community of life, and also acting in their benefit. One can easily witness the growing interest in actions that support a lifestyle of voluntary simplicity, such as repurposing, means you take something that would have been thrown away and instead you turn it to a new purpose. Urban foraging and farming, you find out where the unharvested trees are, for example, and you share this knowledge and everybody goes around and gleans fruit together and maybe even makes jam. Front yard farms. An old student of mine in Berkeley had a whole front yard garden, and at some point, this is an urban street, you know, at some point somebody asked him, well, aren't you afraid that people will steal it? And I love this. He told me this, and he said when he heard that, he thought, oh, right. And so then he went inside, and the first thing he did is to make a big sign that said, please take. He stuck it right in the middle of his tomatoes. And he watched. People were completely taken aback as they encountered this sign, especially the ones who came with intent to steal it. And they took it, and it started conversations. And it opened people's hearts, and after a while, within a couple of years, that entire street, every yard just about, had a front yard garden, and everybody was sharing seeds and making things together. Beautiful, beautiful story. So that urban farming, the tiny house movement, tool lending libraries, old homesteading skills are now coming back. People are interested. Handcrafts, repairing, and the like. I enjoy making journals out of old cereal boxes and waste office paper, and envelopes out of junk mail. I'll attach a link to my blog page that tells you how if you want to try those things yourself. But we're getting into too much detail. Let's pull back. Look at the bigger picture. One last moment. Anti-consumerism actions on a societal level include not only voluntarily withdrawing from the buy, work, buy as entertainment treadmill, and political actions like boycotts and petitions to get these companies to stop being so destructive, but the strategic application of humor, as in seen in ad busting. I'll give examples in another portion of this unit. And Reverend Billy's first churches stop shopping, and I'll give you a video of that. These all help people wake up out of the consumer trance. This too is eco-psychology in action, and it's a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy this week's offerings and that you find them not only interesting, but transformative. I'm Tina Fields, bowing out.